Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, sustaining Alaska's pipeline and its operations today and into the future.
The National Weather Service.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller. Happy Tuesday, April 5th, 2016. This is Alaska Weather. I'll be taking you through your forecast tonight and keeping you up to date on everything that's going on around the entire state. As always, you can follow us online at arh.noaa.gov. That stands for Alaska Regional Headquarters. Our weather info line is 1-800-472-0391. It is a 24/7 line if you ever want to talk to a forecaster at either the Juneau, Fairbanks, or Anchorage office. You can find us online at weather.gov/Alaska if that's easier. Facebook, you can find us at NWS Alaska. Sometimes a little tricky to find on Facebook, but if you use those exact numbers there, exact letters, you should be good. And on Twitter, NWS Alaska, using the hashtag AKwx to get a regional perspective. And then on YouTube, you can find this segment and a few other shows later on this evening. So let's take a look at our headlines for tonight. As you can see, our primary concern for hazards across the state is blowing snow along the Beaufort Seacoast and the Brooks Range, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth here in just a minute. We also have wet conditions continuing for southeast and south central Alaska, primarily along the coastal regions, but certainly going to continue this wet pattern that we are just starting to get into now. Above normal temperatures will continue for southern Alaska. That is not a new story at all. We've been above normal for several days, even weeks, with just intermittent breaks there where we've returned to normal. And then a spring-like pattern with those above normal temperatures. We're going to see more daytime heating as the April sun continues to warm the landmass. And with that, we expect the possibility of TS, which stands for thunderstorms. So we do have some thunderstorms to talk about in our forecast this evening. So again, our hazards that we're looking at for tonight, just these three zones up here along the Beaufort Seacoast and along the Brooks Range. And you can see here it's an advisory, and this is for winter weather, blowing snow conditions expected. We have fairly gusty easterly winds, about 25 to 40 miles here just north of Sagwan, and then along the actual coastline there, about 25 to 45 miles an hour, and that's again out of the east. These advisories are in effect until 6 a.m. Thursday morning, and they're for conditions of a half mile or less at times in that blowing snow. Expect the worst conditions tonight. We should see things slowly improve into Wednesday, and then the advisories expire there on Thursday morning. And as far as our breakup map, you can see the date here is from yesterday, but that's because there is no change to the breakup, so don't have any changes to report, and we'll keep you up to date on this as we go into the breakup season. So let's take a look at our satellite loop this evening. Here is our primary area of low pressure. This is not a real strong area of low pressure, but this is really what's driving the pattern for much of the area, with the jet stream remaining south of the Aleutian chain and even south of much of the area. And so with that, this area of low pressure is helping to spin up plenty of moisture into the coastline here of southeast and south central. And the jet is really far south of the area and pushing moisture into, say, the southern portions of southeast and down into Dixon Entrance region. And so this area of low pressure will help to continue to bring warm air on its eastern side and some colder air on its western side as you have that counterclockwise flow around an area of low pressure. And so with that, some cold air showers being pushed into the central and eastern Aleutians and even into the Alaska Peninsula. And then our slightly stronger storm system is off towards the western Aleutians. It is weakening at this time, but let's take a look at it in motion here one more time. And you can see there it is, moving right into the western Aleutians and the Shimia area right now. And with that, we do have some small areas of storm force winds expected for the marine zones later tonight. But this will continue to bring a round of precipitation, rain in the central corridor here where the warm air is being brought up. But otherwise, it's a rain-snow mix. And then on the backside, we just have snow conditions as colder air is wrapped off of the Kamchatka Peninsula. Over the mainland, mostly clear skies for much of the interior. Even South Central saw some breaks and saw some clear skies as this front has kind of decayed as it reached the coastline here. And with our cross barrier flow coming over the mountains, that helps to dry the air out as it comes down on the other side of the mountains, on the leeward side of the mountains. And so therefore we've been able to see some pockets open up in this cloud cover. And up towards the Brooks Range, that's where we see some of that blowing snow and those lower clouds hanging out up there. We do have another weak area of low pressure off the northwest coast, and we can see that here, just a small spin there, and with that we do have some light snow for the western flank of the Seward Peninsula and up there towards Kotzebue. And one more time here on our loop, there's where you can see that jet stream really pumping that moisture up into southeast Alaska and down by Ketchikan there. And that will continue to be the case, and we'll talk about that more as we go into the forecast here, how that's going to play out. So here's our 1,000 millibar area of low pressure just south of Kodiak Island. And again, there's the showers. We even have the potential for some thunderstorms. We haven't seen any lightning strikes on our network yet, but we do have the potential for some thunderstorms in these showers as some colder air aloft is helping to make for an unstable air mass out over the Gulf. And so with that, we will have that in the forecast this evening and into tomorrow. Here's our front along the Gulf Coast, stretching basically all the way from Juneau up into south central Alaska. We've had rain, moderate at times, reported at Yakutat, but rain stretching all the way through southeast towards south central, and again, mainly impacting coastal areas, Seward, Homer, Soldovia, those places, not seeing a lot of inward forcing towards the mainland there. As we get out towards the Aleutians, that's where we see that colder air wrapping around this area of low pressure. And so we have a fairly widespread area of cloud cover and those cold showers coming in, mixing with rain and snow as you get toward the northeastern side of the Alaska Peninsula. But it's more snow showers as you get west of Dutch Harbor. And then there's our stronger system, 982 millibars out over the western Aleutians. And with that, we do have that warm air helping to bring some rain into this mix, but otherwise mixed precipitation for the most part until you get onto the backside where we see the snow completely taking over. With that storm system, that's where we're going to expect those gustier winds and storm force winds for the marine zones. Now here's the blowing snow conditions that we have seen along the Arctic coastline today, and that's really due to this strong area of high pressure at 1,034 millibars up over well north of our state over the Beaufort Sea, and that's really keeping a tight gradient from east to west. The air is flowing in through here, and that's what's making the blowing snow conditions. And there's our weak area of low pressure that we saw on satellite. We're going to talk some more about this boundary here over eastern portion of the state and off into Canada. This is really kind of a stationary boundary, an Arctic air mass, if you will. It separates the colder air over the northeastern portion of the state and more of the warmer air that's been brought up courtesy of that jet stream over the southeastern portion of the state. So we're highlighting that because when that warm air rides up and over this boundary here, this colder boundary, it helps to lift that warm air. It's kind of like a wedge, and it lifts that warm air up over, and therefore we can see plenty of precipitation associated with that. Most of it off to the east of the state, but there will be some just over there near Chicken and Eagle, Alaska. So again, into tonight, we see that front along the coast, and there's those thunderstorms we talked about over the Gulf of Alaska. Just a few showers making it inland to the Alaska Range. Higher elevations can expect some of that to fall as snow. And then we do expect for White and Chilkoot Pass, we'll see a rain-snow mix becoming all snow later tonight. A warm front will swing up from the southeastern portion of the Gulf and into the central Gulf as we go tonight into Wednesday. And we'll talk some more about that and the rain that will bring up with it. And then again, our blowing snow conditions will continue along the Beaufort Sea coast with that advisory in place. Out over the Aleutians, we have continuing rain-snow mix along that occluded boundary, and this system should continue to weaken, but the winds will still be gusty on the backside and will bring a healthy amount of precipitation associated with that front. So on into Wednesday now, let's take a look at southeast first. There's that moisture coming up with that warm front, and then it will swing through the Gulf of Alaska. We are just seeing general moisture riding up that strong jet stream and over into the southern portions of the panhandle, and that'll just continue to produce rain for those areas. Then as we get towards southeast, farther north and southeast and towards south central, we just have continuing rain as that front falls apart into just a trough of low pressure along the Gulf Coast there. Again, continuing to see some snow mix in at higher elevations of Chilkoot and White Pass. But for the most part, this should just be rain, and again, impacting mostly the coastal areas. Even some moderate rain will continue into Wednesday for places in the Prince William Sound. Then our area of low pressure is continuing to weaken here, that parent low that we talked about. We'll see a mixed precipitation as it moves through southwest Alaska. Nothing heavy expected with that. And then this front continues to fall apart on Wednesday out over the central Aleutians with a rain-snow mix. Our conditions should slowly improve. We do still have that blowing snow advisory in effect, reduced visibility with that, and some fog up along the Arctic coast. And then our 1007 millibar low continues to weaken as we go through Wednesday. On into Thursday now, we see our 1000 millibar low pressure has formed along that warm front and continues to help to push precipitation from southeast up to the northwest. So not really a big pattern shift here. We're going to continue to see wet conditions along the coastlines, a little bit of snow mixing in for the higher elevations, and then this is the remnants of the boundary that is currently up against the Gulf Coast. This will swing around, again, counterclockwise fashion, swing through the Alaska Peninsula, bringing some rain to those areas. A stronger low will start to move up on Thursday into Friday from the North Pacific into the Aleutian Islands. This is not really expected to be a big player into the Bering Sea, but it will definitely impact the central Aleutians with another round of rain, snow, and wind direction will switch to the easterly flow there. Up over the state, just some light snow showers over the central portion of the Alaska Range and up towards the Brooks Range. And then our blowing snow conditions will finally start to let up as we get into the day on Thursday. Taking a look at temperatures today, we had fairly warm temperatures across southeast Alaska, mostly mid to upper 40s and some low 50s even reported at Klawock. And as we got towards Middleton Island, it was 45 degrees, 42 there in Cordova, and 39 was the cold spot with some precipitation falling in Valdez. 50 degrees here in the Cook Inlet region at Anchorage International, and we saw 47 degrees up in the Copper River Basin at Galkana and 50 degrees for Talkeetna. Taking a look towards the interior, it was 49 degrees at 4 p.m. over Fairbanks, and towards the Brooks Range, it was generally in the upper 20s to low 30s. It wasn't until you got to the north coast that we saw temperatures start to get into the teens and even the single digits. Out towards the Seward Peninsula, it was 26 at Nome and 10 degrees further on the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. Down into the southwestern portion of the state, generally it was in the low to mid 40s for much of the inland locations. A little bit cooler there along the ice pack at Nunivak Island, Macoriac, reporting 25 degrees. And then as we got out along the Alaska Peninsula, generally in the low to mid 40s with 30s being the primary condition at 4 p.m. out over the Pribilof Islands. Taking a look at our temperatures tonight, fairly similar night setting up with plenty of cloud cover over much of the coastal locations. So we expect southeast Alaska to be in the low to mid 40s, maybe some upper 30s as you get a little bit closer towards Yakutat. We'll be generally in the mid 30s and not seeing a whole lot of freezing conditions towards south central Alaska. Those freezing conditions will be up towards the interior, and then especially as you get north of the Brooks Range, single digits up there and even some numbers below zero. Out towards the Seward Peninsula, we have conditions generally in the teens, and for southwest Alaska, we'll have generally lows in the mid to low 30s. Out over the Alaska Peninsula, generally in the mid to upper 30s, and that trend will continue all the way out through the Aleutians. For southeast Alaska, for our afternoon highs on Wednesday, we'll expect anywhere from mid 40s to low 50s, just depending on how heavy the rainfall gets in certain spots. Over south central Alaska, we have upper 40s and low 50s expected again with fairly warm air coming up off the Gulf of Alaska, and that warm air will penetrate all the way inland, keeping interior regions in the upper 40s. And not until you get north of the Brooks Range do you see the single digits once again up there along Barrow and Barter Island. Out towards southwest Alaska, we'll see upper 30s and low 40s for highs tomorrow, and low 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and out through the Aleutians. Taking a look at our flying weather now, our IFI conditions expected for tomorrow morning are generally where we see that heaviest precipitation and heaviest moisture influx, and so that'll be up in the passes of Chilkoot and White there near Skagway, a little bit near Yakutat. Some IFR conditions over south central where we have strong onshore flow helping to really make for some upslope and lower ceilings, and then just a few pockets associated with that front that we saw out over the western Aleutians. Up along the Arctic coast, as we've been talking about, we'll see those blowing snow making for half-mile visibility and some IFR conditions up there, and otherwise fairly widespread MVFR with the strong moisture from the Gulf moving in. On into the afternoon period and the evening period now for flying weather. We expect fairly similar conditions, not a whole lot of change in this pattern expected very quickly. So fairly similar conditions for the IFR along the coast, and that area of IFR that we saw out over the western Aleutians will start to break up as that front weakens, but we do still see that area of IFR along the north slope with the lower visibility and the low ceilings. So looking at our passes now, Inutuvik will be VFR going to MVFR, Adigan will be VFR going to NVFR. Lake Clark and Merrill will be MVFR on their eastern portions, but should be VFR to the west as that moisture cannot quite make it over the Alaska Range. MVFR on the east, again for rainy, and VFR conditions on the western side. Marginal visual flight rules for Windy tomorrow. Isabel will be visual flight rules. Mentasta VFR. We'll also see Tanita be MVFR. Portage is going to go from MVFR to IFR conditions. And Chilkoot and White should improve from IFR to MVFR. Taking a look at our freezing levels, not a real big surprise here. Surface line is just inland of the coastline, and they climb quickly up to 8,000 feet as you get out over the southeastern portion where that warm air is coming up with that warm front. Taking a look at our icing now, we do have a couple areas of icing to talk about. Light to isolated moderate icing above 5,000 feet for much of the coastline, and some 4,000 foot areas out over the southwestern portion of the state. And then about 2,000 feet and below, we expect some light to isolated moderate up over the northwestern portion of the Bering Strait, and then along that front above 5,000 feet. So looking at our jet now, we can see it diving down here at 100 knots, coming down this turn at 170, 105 knots, as it turns very deeply down to the North Pacific and sharply turns back north. So you can expect some upper level turbulence down here if you have any flights down to Hawaii. And then up towards the westerly flow, and then it becomes a split jet as it moves off into Canada, about 115 knots, becoming 140 knots there just east of the Panhandle. Looking at our 9,000 foot winds, not a whole lot of real strong winds coming around this low. About 40 knots is what we're seeing for the maximum pinch between that high, and we see that curl around this low in counterclockwise fashion fairly quickly. Southerly flow from much of western and central Alaska with onshore flow from the Gulf. And then just a little bit of southeasterly becoming more southerly flow as you get towards the central portion of the Gulf, but fairly light winds over the central portion of the state until you get up along the Arctic coast there where they are out of the east relatively fast. And similar conditions at 3,000 feet now, seeing things out of the south at about 35 knots on the eastern side of this low, coming around and becoming westerly about 20 knots for the Panhandle, the northern portions. And then fairly similar to 9,000 feet, just a little bit calmer out over the Bering and the central Aleutians at about southeast at about 30 knots, becoming more easterly at about 40 knots. So with that, we just have a few pockets of turbulence to talk about. Below 9,000 feet, we expect some light to isolated moderate. Below 3,000 feet out over the front over the western Aleutians, and a small pocket north of the state up there below 4,000 feet. Stay tuned, we'll be right back with your marine forecast.
Only 6 years after the Lituya Bay tsunami, all of Alaska would witness the strongest earthquake ever to strike North America. Measured at between 8.6 and 9.2 on the Richter scale, the quake hit on Good Friday, March 27, 1964.
We received this report through the city manager here in Anchorage that both the oil tanks and docks are on fire at Seward.
Coastal communities like Seward, 126 miles south of Anchorage on Resurrection Bay off Prince William Sound, sustained the most damage. That's because the most powerful earthquake in America was followed by tsunamis.
Everything was split seconds. There really wasn't time to sit and discuss what our options were because there were no options. The options were survive.
Linda McCrae McSwain of Seward was 15 years old when nature altered life as she knew it. A night of terror started at the dinner table.
The first sign of trouble was just the house started shaking, and very, very quickly it became very, very strong, and it just would not stop. It continued and continued and continued, and it always reminded me of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, where just something giant was happening.
The McCraes lived here, a modest house on a hill above Resurrection Bay. They were high enough they could have stayed home and been safe. But 8 people piled in the car and started downhill to check on family members. They had less than an hour.
We drove out to the head of the bay, got to the Lima's house, and it was empty. But my dad and brother wanted to go back into town to fight fire because all of the Standard Oil drums were on fire. And from out where we are, it looked like the city was completely on fire. The water was burning.
They had driven to a subdivision away from downtown, what is now near the airport. 2 neighbors had climbed a crane to get a better look at Seward on fire. What they saw was far more frightening.
Within a minute or two, my dad and brother were back in the house, and my dad was screaming, and this was not a man that ever raised his voice, and he was screaming, "There's a wave coming, there's a tidal wave coming, we have to get to the top of the house."
Using an oil drum for a ladder, Linda and her family, including a 3-week-old baby and a little dog in her mother's coat, jumped onto the roof. They could then see what her dad could not.
Prom was the next night, so he was bringing all of my things, but all the rest of the family, we were now on the top of the roof and could see the wave coming down the bay, and it was a huge wave, a dark, threatening wave, an enormous wall of water coming right towards us, and we all laid down and had our heads at the highest part of the roof, and my dad was the last one to jump, and as soon as my dad hit that roof, this wave just hit with a vengeance, just power that is just unimaginable.
The tsunami turned the roof into a family-sized surfboard.
The instant that it hit, we were just popped up to the top of that wave, just like a cork. So the house was totally torn off of its foundation, and it happened to be the only house, the only structure in the neighborhood that did survive the wave. The entire subdivision just was flattened and floated right by us. So now we were at the top of that wave, and we were spinning at the top of the trees, and it was a wild, wild ride.
Remember, this was March in Alaska. It was cold, dark, and they were expecting snow.
We were wet, but nobody was swept off the roof. Nobody was speared with a tree branch. We were really quiet. It wasn't hysterical or out of control, and we spun around for, I would imagine, I don't know, seemed like a long time, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then we ended up way at the back of the subdivision, back where the rivers come into Seward, and we just jammed into a strand of trees and just sort of, just did a big jolt.
The earthquake and tsunamis crushed the economy in this thriving port city. Linda's scraped knees and the McCrae family's amazing story of survival made headlines in the Anchorage Daily Times. Linda eventually went to the prom with the man she would marry. She finished high school in Seward, went away to college, and now lives in Anchorage. She says no one really talked much about their earthquake and tsunami experiences, but a discovery last year brought it all back.
I knew that my parents had taken a lot of pictures after the quake, but I knew that we had never watched them because people were very busy rebuilding Seward and getting on with their lives. And then last year I found them, and when I opened them, I couldn't believe my good fortune that they were in perfect condition. It brought everything back in the bigger than life colors that I wanted to see, the oversized everything, seeing huge fishing boats sitting up in meadows here, police cars being smashed like kids' toys. I was never really able to describe the enormous, everything was just oversized and just giant sized, and those pictures brought it all back.
This lone stone structure is the only evidence that people used to live out here. The earthquake dropped the elevation of the land. It's now swampy and no longer suitable for building. Some residents had to leave Seward to find work. Many stayed. Those survivors now see coastal living differently.
People love Seward. This is their home. They love this town, and it's a town to be loved. It's everybody's hometown, so I am not afraid to be in Seward. I mean, I have land right down on the water, would love to live on the water, but there's certainly a respect. We know that there were a number of lives lost here, and we also know that many of us are just very lucky to be here.
And welcome back for your marine forecast. As you can see here, sea surface temperatures, we're looking for conditions to continue to remain just above freezing here along the southern portion of the Bering Sea. And then we're starting to see some warm air, really warm water, surge up towards southeast in the northeastern portion of the Gulf. And so with that, we do expect sea surface temperatures to continue to warm fairly quickly as we move through April. Now let's look at our sea ice. You can see here our main pack with our marginal sea ice here along the coast. We have had a few strips break off and move from northeast to southwest here, just south of Nunivak Island, and otherwise some marginal ice here, possibly seeing some water over top of the ice, so it's a little hard to get the best imagery in those areas. For the Cook Inlet region, we are just about ice-free except for the Matanuska River, the river ice coming out, and the Susitna River ice coming out. Let's dive into our forecast for the Marines. In the southeast Alaska, we can see southeasterly flow being the dominant flow, and generally between 15 and 25 knots. Inward seas, we'll see 3 to 5 feet in the inner passage, and out towards the open waters, 11 feet as expected on Wednesday. Now into Thursday, we can see northerly winds for Lynn Canal at 20 knots, but becoming southerly by Dixon Entrance, 20 to 30 knots, and seas generally 4 to 6 feet. Out over the open waters, south winds until you get towards the Yakutat, and then it becomes northeast in 25 to 35 knots, a little bit on the increase there as that next warm front slides up, and 12 to 13 feet. Out over the south central portion of the state, again coming around that area of low pressure, so we generally see southeast over the open waters, east and then northeast down towards the Cook Inlet and Shelikof, and that'll be between 15 and 25 knots, 10 feet over the open waters, and about 6 feet out over the western Barrens. On into Thursday now, we'll see things start to calm down quite a bit as that front falls apart over our area. Just generally northwest to north winds, 10 to 20 knots through the smaller areas, and then variable winds 10 knots out over the open waters. Seas generally between 6 and 7 feet over the open waters, and only about 3 feet for Cook Inlet. Now taking a look at the Alaska Peninsula, fairly calm conditions with about 10 to 15 feet, mostly variable, and 10 to 15 knots, excuse me, mostly variable, 6 to 8 foot seas south of the chain, and about 1 to 3 feet north of the Alaska Peninsula. And then becoming south and southeast, 10 to 15 knots, and seas very similar on Thursday. Taking a look at the Aleutians now, we generally have west to southwesterly flow, 25 to 45 knots, our strongest winds out there, the storm force conditions with that front over the western Aleutians on Wednesday. And then into Thursday, we have a little bit more confused flow, southeast to southerly, 15 to 25 knots until you get to the central Aleutians. Then it's northwest and west, and then becoming northerly, 15 to 25 knots, seas generally on the order of about 11 feet. Out over the western portion of the state, a little bit of confused flow out there as well, northeast and southeast, between 10 and 25 knots, and seas fairly light at 1 to 3 feet. And fairly similar conditions with 2 foot seas, but building to 10 feet by the Pribilofs on Thursday, generally out of the south and southeast. That strong easterly flow will dominate along the Arctic coast at 35 knots, and that will remain much the case as we go into Thursday, easterly flow at about 30 knots. Taking a look at tonight's forecast, once again, our advisories for blowing snow in effect along the Beaufort Sea coast until 6 a.m. Onshore flow will continue to bring rain through the Gulf into the southern portion of the state.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Sometimes the best way to find a living is to stay right where you are and study with UAS online. Career-specific distance programs from the University of Alaska Southeast are the fastest way to increase your earning power.
We connect all over the world.